I call Stuart Nash.
Mr Speaker, I have had a lot to do with Grant Robinson, and I've read most of what he has written, and never once in his role as finance spokesperson has he ever said that Labor wants a capital gains tax. So let me put on the record now for everyone listening that Grant did not say Labor wants a capital gains tax. What he did say is this is a very poor piece of legislation. And when you get the Finance Minister admitting that he didn't know what effect this legislation would have, we know that we're in trouble, because there are a number of tests that define good legislation. Fairness, but also ease of compliance, that it captures the right people, that it's hard to avoid. This test, this bright line test, just blows all this sort of stuff out of the water. It is a dreadful piece of legislation. It is a political piece of legislation, and David Bennett knows it. This is a piece of legislation that is poll-driven, and it is not pragmatic. And the reason I say that, Mr Speaker, is because a number of submitters who understand the tax system a lot better than anyone that sits in the Select Committee came and said, this will not work, but we have some ideas that will make this a much better piece of legislation. And they were ignored. They were ignored because this is what this government wants to force through, and it is simply wrong. And I think that the taxpayers actually expect more. The main criticism of this piece of legislation from the experts is that it is piecemeal, that it doesn't address the issue. Now, Mr Speaker, the last member talked about the intention test. We all know that the intention test is not working. It simply isn't. What the intention test is if you are buying a property, if an investor is buying a property for capital gain and they sell it, they have to pay tax. If they are buying it for rental yield and they sell it, they do not have to pay tax. It's about literally the intention of purchasing it. But we all know, and certainly the members of the IRD know, that it is very, very difficult to enforce this intention test, because all you need to do is you need to say, oh, well, shivers, I bought it for yield, but someone offered me a price I couldn't turn down. I had no idea I was going to make a capital gain, and that was not my intention. And it is almost impossible to prove them wrong or to take a court case which the IRD will win. And they know this because they have tried it. You would have to be an investor would have to be a little bit of a fool to go and say to everyone, I'm buying this for a capital gain, but don't tell anyone. And then when they make the capital gain, they come and say, oh no, it was about yield. It is an extremely easy test to avoid, Mr Speaker. We are supporting this legislation because we support anything that would have an impact in cooling down the market, even though, I must admit, this sort of legislation is not really designed theoretically to cool a market. What it's designed to do is bring taxpayers into the tax system that in fact are not in the system at this point in time. It is simply not fair that if people are buying and selling houses with the intention of making a capital gain, however that is very difficult to prove, that they are not paying tax. And that is what we need to sort out. Mr Speaker, it is actually interesting because the IRD put forward two options. The first option was the 2-year bright line test, and that's what we're debating now. The second option that they debated in the regulatory impact statement was a 5-year option. And the IRD admitted that that would actually make it fairer because it would capture a lot more people. What they said that the first option, the 2-year bright line test, would do, and I quote here, this option creates an economic distortion as it creates a lock-in effect. In other words, it creates an incentive for people to hold property for longer than 2 years to avoid the bright line test. And the key word there, Mr Speaker, is avoid. So what we are going to see yet again is people avoiding paying their fair share. And all they need to do is hold on for 2 years, then 2 years and one day they can sell it. Of course, their intention was never to make a capital gain. It was about yield, and they pay absolutely no tax on that property, yet someone who sells it as a result of, sells a property or an investment property as a result of an unfortunate circumstance like Mr Robinson outlined, then they are caught by this test. Mr Speaker, this is just not a good way to make tax legislation, and there will be amendments to this bill. I have absolutely no doubt about that in the future. As we talked about, The main home test is something that we debated substantially in the Select Committee, and we went back and we asked for further definitions, we asked for a depth of information, and it came out that the main home test was actually about the one you have the greatest connection with. And there is no definition in law about what defines greater connection. And the classic case, Mr. Speaker, is actually a number of MPs ourselves. We could conceivably argue that our apartment that we spend 2 or 3 or 4 nights a week in, we have a greater connection with than the family home. And you can see how this is easily gamed. And taxpayers, especially property investors, are not stupid. They may say that their main home is the batch that's now worth $1 million versus the family home that's worth $250,000. How do they define that? The batch has been in the home for a long time. It's part of my family. It's where I grew up. It's where I feel the greatest connection. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that is not the house that is caught in the 2-year bright line test. Mr. Speaker, all I am highlighting here is you could drive a bus through this piece of tax legislation. You could drive a bus through it, and that is not the way to make tax legislation. But that is not me saying that, Mr. Speaker. That is people from the Chartered Accountants from Australia and New Zealand, the New Zealand Law Society, KPMG. There are a number of experts who actually said...
I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come to me to leave the chair for the dinner break. This debate is interrupted, and I shall resume the chair at 7:30.